Welcome to Pillowtime lore. My dear ones, tell me, when was the last time you truly let yourself rest? Not just lying down, scrolling on your phone, or thinking about tomorrow's worries. I mean really rested. Maybe tonight you can. Do you remember those nights from childhood when someone tucked you in, kissed your forehead, and whispered, "It's okay, you're safe now"? Perhaps they told you a story, one that made the whole world fade away until only their voice and your dreams remained. Even if you've grown older, that feeling never really leaves. It lingers deep inside, waiting to be remembered. And that's why we're here, to bring you back to that warm, quiet place where nothing hurts and nothing rushes you. So, let me ask you, what kind of story do you need tonight? Something magical, something soft and sweet, or maybe just a tale to remind you that you are never alone. Whatever it may be, you've come to the right place. So, snuggle under your blanket. Take a deep breath and let go of the day. The world can wait until morning. Welcome to Pillowtime lore, where every story feels like a safe, gentle hug for your soul. Every person has a dream they hold close to their heart, a longing they whisper to themselves in the quiet of night. The kind of dream that feels so impossible, yet so deeply needed that you would give anything to make it real. We live our lives believing that if we work hard enough, love fiercely enough, or hope desperately enough, happiness will come. But what if happiness came not through effort, but through a single wish granted in an instant? No cost in sight, no warning of what it might take from you later. This is Lila's story, a young woman whose life was built on love, duty, and quiet sacrifice. She lived for her family, especially her fragile younger sister, Amelia, whose life seemed to be slipping away day by day. Lila never complained, never asked for more, but deep inside, she carried silent wishes for her sister's health, for her family's happiness, for her own heart to feel seen and free. When Lila discovered the painting, it felt like a miracle, a beautiful, mysterious gift that promised to turn her silent hopes into reality. At first, it seemed harmless, even holy. Her life blossomed. Her parents laughed again. Amelia's health returned. The world opened up to her, as if it had always been waiting. But behind every perfect moment, a shadow lurked, unseen yet growing stronger with each wish she made. The truth is, there is always a price, sometimes hidden so well that you don't see it until it's too late. And by the time you realize, the thing you've been clinging to has its claws buried deep in your soul. This story is not just about magic or curses. It's about temptation, about how even good people can be led astray when offered their heart's desire. It's about the lies we tell ourselves to justify the things we want, and how easily happiness can become a prison when it is built on borrowed time. So, as you listen, remember this: the line between a gift and a curse is thinner than you think. And sometimes, the scariest monsters are not the ones lurking in the dark, but the ones we invite inside with open arms. The sun was dipping low, the sky brushed with soft gold and faded pink as the carriage rattled down the winding road. Lila sat quietly, watching the countryside roll past, the fields and trees blurring together like strokes of an old painting. Her family spoke cheerfully of new beginnings, but she remained lost in thought. She had grown up in small, familiar rooms filled with laughter and routine, and now, with this sudden inheritance, Everything felt too big, too strange. The villa looming ahead was not just a house. It was a symbol of change, and change, Lila knew, always came with both wonder and sorrow. The house came into view at last, tall and silent, its windows like watchful eyes. Ivy crept up the stone walls, giving the place an almost living presence. Her mother clasped her hands together with delight, speaking of how they would make this house a home, while her father's gaze lingered on the vast stretch of land, already calculating the work that would need to be done. Amelia, her younger sister, leaned forward eagerly, her energy bright and unrestrained. Lila, however, sat still, a weight in her chest that she couldn't name. Sometimes the heart senses things long before the mind does. Inside, the villa greeted them with an unsettling stillness. Dust motes floated in the pale light, and their footsteps echoed through the grand hall. Faded murals stretched across the ceiling, depicting battles and angels whose glory had long faded. Furniture sat beneath white sheets, like silent witnesses to forgotten lives. Amelia ran through the halls, her laughter ringing out, pushing back the gloom. Yet even her joy couldn't completely chase away the feeling that this house had been waiting. As her family busied themselves with unpacking, Lila wandered upstairs, drawn by a quiet pull she didn't understand. At the end of a narrow hallway, she found a small locked door, a key hanging beside it as though placed there deliberately. With hesitant fingers, she turned the lock and stepped into the attic. The air was heavy and still. In the farthest corner stood a tall, draped figure. Her pulse quickened as she reached for the cloth, pulling it away to reveal a stunning painting. Her breath caught. The face in the portrait was her own, dressed in an old-fashioned gown, eyes gleaming with unsettling familiarity. Lila stumbled back, a nervous laugh escaping her lips, whispering to herself that it must simply be coincidence. Though deep inside, a quiet voice urged her to run. The evening slipped into night with a gentle hush, the kind of stillness that only settles over old houses. Lila sat on the edge of her bed, folding the last of her clothes and trying to focus on the simple, ordinary task. Her room was spacious, far grander than her old one, with tall windows draped in heavy velvet curtains and a wardrobe that smelled faintly of cedar. It should have felt exciting, like a fresh beginning, yet something about it felt borrowed, as though it belonged to someone else who had simply stepped out for a while. She ran her hand along the windowsill, thinking of the home they had left behind, a place filled with warmth and noisy mornings. She wondered if this new chapter would ever feel as safe. But no matter how hard she tried to focus on unpacking, her thoughts kept circling back to the attic, to that strange painting, the face she could not unsee, the woman who looked so uncannily like her. It clung to her mind like a half-forgotten dream, disturbing and yet strangely magnetic. The things we are most afraid of are the very things we can't turn away from. Whenever she glanced up at the ceiling, it was as though she could feel a quiet weight pressing down from above, a presence she couldn't explain. By the time her family went to bed, the villa had fallen into a deep, creaking silence. Lila lay awake, staring at the ceiling as shadows stretched and shifted across the walls. Amelia slept soundly in the room next door, her soft breathing a small comfort in the dark. Their parents' voices had faded after their goodnight wishes, and Lila began to drift, her eyelids heavy, When she heard it, a sound so faint, at first she wondered if she was dreaming. It was like the hushed murmur of a voice, secretive and close, yet impossibly distant. Her heart thudded as she slipped out of bed, moving quietly through the hall. The whispers seemed to rise and fall like a strange melody, guiding her steps, until, just as she reached the attic door, they stopped, replaced by silence, so thick it made her ears ring. She hesitated, hand hovering over the key. A cold draft brushed against her cheek, and for a heartbeat, she almost turned back, but curiosity pushed her forward. The attic was dark and still, unchanged except for the painting. When her gaze landed on it, she froze. The woman's lips had curved ever so slightly, forming the barest hint of a smile that felt knowing, alive. Lila's breath caught, fear prickling at the back of her neck. She backed away, whispering to herself that it was only her mind playing tricks. Yet deep inside, she knew some truths begin quietly, like whispers in the dark, and grow louder the longer you try to ignore them. The next morning began quietly, the kind of peaceful morning that promised an ordinary day. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, turning the dusty air golden. Amelia hummed softly as she brushed her hair at the edge of her bed, her tune light and carefree, while Lila was on her knees, searching frantically through drawers and bags. Her heartbeat quickening with each passing second. She was looking for her silver locket, the one their grandmother had given her, a small but deeply treasured gift. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it held memories, like tiny fragments of her childhood, tucked safely inside. Losing it felt like losing a part of herself. When she couldn't find it, Lila turned sharply to Amelia and asked if she had seen it. Amelia paused for the briefest moment. Her brush caught mid-stroke, then she shrugged and said no. Her voice too casual, too quick. Lila's sharp eyes caught the flicker of hesitation. It was the same look Amelia had whenever she was hiding something. Frustration bloomed in Lila's chest. Slow at first, then rising like a tide, she searched again, digging through every corner of the room. But the locket was nowhere. Amelia insisted she had nothing to do with it, her voice growing defensive. Yet the more she denied it, the more certain Lila became that her sister had borrowed it without asking. Their voices rose, echoing off the villa's old walls. Their parents called out, telling them to stop, but neither girl listened. Amelia, usually playful and sweet, now stood with her arms crossed, chin lifted, her stubbornness like a wall Lila couldn't break through. Finally, Lila snapped, shouting words she didn't mean, words that landed like sharp stones. She saw Amelia's face crumble, saw the tears gathering in her eyes, and guilt pierced through Lila's anger. But pride kept her silent. With her heart pounding and her breath shaky, Lila turned and stormed out, climbing the creaking stairs to the attic, each step colder than the last. The room at the top felt like a different world, heavy and still. She glared at the painting, pouring every ounce of her rage into that unblinking face. For a moment, it seemed to shift, the woman's calm expression twisting into a sharp, angry scowl that mirrored Lila's own. Lila stumbled back, her anger replaced by sudden, gut-deep fear. She fled, locking the attic door behind her, telling herself it was just a trick of her mind. But the next morning, Amelia lay pale and feverish, too weak to rise. She had been perfectly fine the night before. Lila sat at her bedside, dread pooling in her stomach. The timing was too precise, too cruel, and though she tried to push the thought away, it came back again and again, whispering like a shadow. What if the painting had caused this? What if her anger had not stayed hers alone? A few days later, Amelia's fever finally began to fade, leaving her weak but recovering. Lila, however, couldn't shake the heaviness in her chest. The guilt of their argument still clung to her like a thorn buried deep beneath her skin. She needed space to think, to breathe, so she decided to take a walk to the nearby village. The path wound through tall grass, swaying gently in the breeze, dotted with wildflowers that looked almost too delicate for this world. The morning sun was warm on her skin, yet there was something strangely still about the countryside that day. Like the world itself was waiting, holding its breath. Lila thought of her grandmother's old words. Sometimes silence isn't peace, my dear. Sometimes it's a warning. As she walked, her mind drifted to Amelia. They had always been close, more like friends than sisters. Amelia had been Lila's confidant, the one who understood her fears and dreams without judgment. The thought that her last words to Amelia had been spoken in anger gnawed at her life, had a cruel way of making us regret the things we said when we thought we had endless time to make them right. She passed small cottages with neatly tended gardens, exchanging polite smiles with the villagers. Just as she was about to turn back, an old man caught her attention. He sat alone on a worn wooden bench outside a tiny shop. His posture stooped, but his presence commanding. His face was weathered like an old map, each deep line a trace of sorrow, experience, and secrets untold. When Lila greeted him and casually mentioned that her family had recently moved into the grand villa on the hill, the change in his demeanor was immediate. The soft friendliness in his eyes vanished, replaced by a sharp, wary fear. Leaning forward on his cane, he asked in a trembling voice if she had explored the entire house. Lila hesitated before admitting she'd been to the attic, carefully avoiding mention of the painting. At once, his hands clenched around the cane. "Child," he rasped, his voice urgent and low. "Some doors are not meant to be opened." He spoke of dark history, of misfortune that clung to that house like a curse. When she pressed him for details, he only shook his head and gave a single, chilling warning: "Stay away from the attic." As Lila walked home, his words coiled around her thoughts like a tightening vine. For the first time, her unease turned to true fear. Maybe, just maybe, the shadow she felt wasn't just in her mind. The following afternoon, Lila could barely sit still. She had tried reading, tried helping her mother in the kitchen, even sat by Amelia's bedside, humming softly to her as she slept. But nothing calmed the storm inside her mind. Amelia's fever had lessened, yet she was still pale and fragile, like a candle flickering in the wind. And then there were Mr. Rowan's words, that trembling, urgent voice telling her to stay away from the attic. Lila replayed that moment over and over, wondering what horrors could provoke such fear in an old man who had surely seen his share of life's tragedies. She thought of how people always say curiosity is dangerous, but to Lila, not knowing felt far worse. Questions, she realized, could be heavier than answers. They press on the soul until it feels like it will break, at last, unable to bear it any longer. She slipped quietly from the villa and made her way back to the village. Careful not to alert her family, the walk seemed longer this time, every rustle of leaves making her heart race. Mr. Rowan was in his usual spot, sitting on the worn wooden bench outside the shop. When he saw her, his face tightened and he shook his head. "You shouldn't have come back," he muttered. "Please," Lila begged, her voice quivering. "I need to know. I can't live in that house blindly, pretending nothing is wrong. I promise I won't tell anyone what you say." For a long moment, the old man said nothing. Finally, with a heavy sigh, he gestured for her to sit, his eyes fixed on the distant hills as he began to speak, his voice low and steady, like someone unearthing a buried wound. "Many years ago," he began, "that villa belonged to a woman named Evelyn Hartwell. She was a vision, breathtakingly beautiful, poised and admired by all. But beauty," he said, glancing at Lila, "can be a dangerous thing when it hides the storm inside. Evelyn was ambitious, far more than the quiet village could contain as whispers spread. People said she had discovered a dark way to rid herself of pain, guilt, and fear. She poured those pieces of herself into a single object, a magnificent painting made in her likeness. The more Evelyn thrived, the more the painting changed. While her life grew perfect, the painting grew hideous, its face warped and twisted, holding everything she refused to face. Eventually, Mr. Rowan continued, his voice trembling. Evelyn herself grew empty, cold, even her laughter sounded hollow. Then one stormy night, she vanished. Some swore they saw lights raging in the attic. Others claimed to hear screams. His hand tightened around his cane. No one ever found her child. Only the painting remained, and a silence that has haunted that house ever since. He turned to Lila, his eyes fierce. "Evelyn's fate is a warning, one you must never, ever ignore." Lila walked back from the village with her thoughts heavy and restless. Mr. Rowan's warning swirling in her head like a storm she could not escape. "Stay away from the attic," he had said, his voice breaking under the weight of old fear. Yet the more she tried to obey, the stronger the pull became. It was as if the painting lived not only in the attic, but inside her mind, whispering, beckoning. For several days, she avoided going near it, busying herself with chores and caring for Amelia, who was slowly regaining her strength. But each time Lila walked down the hall beneath the creaking attic ceiling, her heart thudded in her chest. She would glance upward, half expecting to see the painted woman leaning over the railing, waiting for her. Finally, one evening, when her parents were tending to work in the garden and Amelia had fallen asleep, Lila found herself climbing the narrow steps, almost without realizing it. "Perhaps I just need to prove there's nothing to fear," she told herself, though deep down she knew it was a lie. The painting stood silently in the corner, its colors muted in the dim light. Lila stared into those painted eyes, so eerily alive, and felt a chill ripple through her. The memory of Amelia's sudden fever rose unbidden, bringing with it a terrible thought. What if it hadn't been an ordinary illness? Her breath quickened as an idea formed, a dangerous, reckless idea. "If you truly hold power," she whispered to the painting, "show me." She closed her eyes, her voice barely audible as she made a simple wish, that tomorrow would be bright and sunny, though the forecast had predicted heavy clouds. When she opened her eyes, she swore she saw the woman's lips curve ever so slightly. As if sharing a private joke, Lila fled the attic, her pulse pounding in her ears. The next morning, she awoke to sunlight streaming through her window, golden and warm, not a cloud in sight. Lila stood frozen, equal parts wonder and dread coursing through her veins. To be sure it wasn't a coincidence, she made another wish later that day, that her mother would forget to scold her for neglecting her chores. Her mother only smiled gently and told her to rest. The painting's face seemed different when Lila returned that night, its eyes gleaming with something dark, its beauty sharper, hungrier with each wish. Lila felt a strange hollowing inside her, as if tiny fragments of her heart were being stolen and sealed within the canvas. Still, she told no one, even to Amelia. She smiled and said nothing, hiding her growing fear beneath a mask of calm, because deep down, she already knew the truth. Nothing in this world came without a price. The days that followed were like a dream, soft and golden, as if someone had painted Lila's world with warm light. The tension that had lingered in their home seemed to vanish overnight. Her parents were no longer stern or preoccupied, but gentle and full of laughter. Amelia's fever broke completely, her cheeks returning to their healthy glow. Even their small, ordinary conversations felt lighter, easier. When Lila ventured into the village, she noticed an even stranger change. People who had once been distant now greeted her with kindness, offering smiles and warm words. Some even complimented her, speaking as though they had known her for years. It was subtle at first, like a soft hum in the background, but gradually it became impossible to ignore. It seemed as though the entire world had tilted in her favor, and yet the attic told a different story. While her life grew brighter, the painting grew darker at first. Lila thought she was imagining things, a slightly deeper shadow in the background, a faint twist in the painted woman's smile. But day by day, those changes sharpened into something undeniable. The once serene eyes now glimmered with a cold, almost predatory sharpness. The lips, once gentle, curved into a smirk that sent shivers racing down Lila's spine. The background behind the woman seemed to swirl with strange shapes that almost looked alive, like trapped figures struggling to escape. Lila told herself not to be afraid, but unease clung to her like a second skin. At night, her dreams became a battlefield. She would find herself standing in the attic, moonlight spilling over the canvas. The painted woman would step out of the frame with an elegance both terrifying and mesmerizing. Her voice was soft, honeyed, coaxing Lila to make more wishes, to take whatever her heart longed for. "These gifts are yours," the woman would whisper. "Why deny yourself what you deserve each time?" Lila woke, trembling, her heart pounding like a drum. She tried to convince herself it was just a dream, but in the quiet hours, her resolve began to crack. "Maybe I'm only borrowing happiness," she reasoned. "I can stop whenever I choose." But deep down, she knew the truth, a truth as cold as the attic's silence. Happiness that comes too easily always has a cost. And somewhere, in the growing darkness of that painting, a terrible price was quietly being prepared. The villa was quiet, almost too quiet, when a sudden, sharp knock echoed through the heavy wooden doors. Lila, who had been sitting by the window, staring blankly at the golden fields beyond, jolted at the sound, her hands resting in her lap. felt strangely heavy as she rose to answer. When she opened the door, Mr. Rowan stood before her, breathless and pale, his weathered face etched with lines of worry that seemed older than the hills themselves. His cane shook slightly as he leaned on it, and without waiting for her to invite him in, he stepped across the threshold, his eyes darting about the room like a man stepping into a place of danger. Lila greeted him politely, but her voice was soft, almost too soft, as though part of her had been left behind somewhere she could not name. Even she could hear the strange stillness in her own tone, and for a fleeting moment, she wondered when her words had begun to sound so hollow. Mr. Rowan's frown deepened as he studied her face. Once, her eyes had sparkled with curiosity and warmth, but now there was a distant coldness in them, as if some unseen fog had crept in and dimmed their light with a shaky breath. He asked how life had been since her family moved in. Lila hesitated, then confessed that things had been unusually perfect lately. Too perfect. She spoke of Amelia's recovery, the laughter in the halls, the kindness of the villagers. Yet, as the words spilled out, they rang false in her own ears. Like lines recited from a play, Mr. Rowan gripped his cane so tightly his knuckles whitened. His voice trembled as he finally revealed the truth he had held back for so long. The painting, he said, was no mere decoration. It was alive, a vessel that fed on its owner's soul. Every wish granted was a bargain. Every moment of happiness, a piece of oneself surrendered. The brighter the life outside became, the darker and hungrier the painting grew. Evelyn, the previous owner, had not vanished into thin air. She had been devoured, absorbed entirely by the very creation she thought she controlled. At first, Lila laughed weakly, shaking her head. It was impossible. It had to be. But Mr. Rowan's eyes, filled with grief and raw terror, broke through her denial, heart pounding. She tore past him and raced up the narrow staircase. When she flung open the attic door, her breath caught in her throat. The painting was no longer a reflection of her face. It had warped into something monstrous, its features twisted, its eyes glowing with cruel intelligence. The background churned like a living storm, shadows writhing within it. And in that chilling moment, Lila understood. This was not just a curse. It was a hunger that would never stop, unless she found the strength to fight it. The night raged with a fury that seemed almost alive. The storm outside was relentless. Rain hammered against the windows like 1,000 desperate fists, while wind howled through the trees, tearing at branches and bending them as if they were made of paper. Lightning cracked across the sky, its blinding flashes illuminating the old villa in brief, haunting glimpses. The entire house groaned and shuddered with every gust, as if it too were caught in the storm's wild grip. Lila's heart pounded as she climbed the narrow attic stairs, each step echoing louder than the roar of the tempest outside. She could hear them now, the whispers she had once strained to catch, no longer soft or subtle. They rose and twisted into clear voices calling her name. The sound swirled around her like a living storm, filling her ears, filling her mind. They urged her to come closer, to surrender, to let go of her fear and embrace the power that was hers for the taking. When she burst through the attic door, the voices exploded into a single deafening chorus. The room seemed to shift and breathe, shadows slithering across the walls. The painting pulsed like a beating heart, its surface rippling like dark water. The woman inside the frame was no longer Lila, no longer even human. Her features were twisted into something monstrous. Her eyes burned like embers. Her mouth stretched into a smile that was both mocking and hungry. Lila staggered forward, her body trembling, her mind clouded with temptation. The voices promised her everything: a life without sorrow, without loss, without fear. They told her she deserved happiness, that she deserved to have the world bend to her will. And for a moment she saw it herself, standing proud and powerful. Amelia, healthy and laughing. Her parents, never knowing hardship, every dream within reach. But then another image came, sharp and painful. Amelia lying pale and weak in her bed, her parents' worried faces shadowed with grief. Lila realized with a jolt that every gift the painting had given her had been stolen from those she loved. This was not salvation, it was sacrifice, and her family was paying the price, with tears streaming down her face. She reached for a heavy brass candlestick resting on a nearby table. Lightning lit the attic as she raised it high. Her cry was one of anger, sorrow, and fierce defiance, and she brought it crashing down on the painting. The frame shattered with an unearthly shriek, the canvas splitting apart in a burst of blinding light that swallowed the room. The voices were silenced at last. The storm outside began to fade, and Lila fell to her knees, trembling and gasping. The air felt strangely light, as if the house itself had finally released a breath it had been holding for years. She whispered to herself that it was over. She was free, yet deep within her chest, a quiet unease stirred like a faint ripple beneath calm water, reminding her that some darkness never truly disappears. Morning arrived gently, like a soft exhale after a night of holding its breath. Golden sunlight streamed through the villa windows, spilling across the worn wooden floors. The storm clouds that had loomed heavy the night before were now scattered, leaving the sky washed clean and blue for the first time since stepping foot into this place. Lila felt warmth instead of unease. The air was no longer thick and oppressive. It carried only the earthy scent of rain-soaked soil and the sweet song of birds perched on the swaying branches outside. It felt as if the house itself had awakened from a terrible dream. Lila opened her eyes slowly, a strange calm settling over her. Her breaths felt fuller, easier, as if a weight she had carried for weeks had finally been lifted. Her emotions, once tangled in whispers and unseen strings, were truly her own again. She no longer felt the constant pull of a presence lurking in the shadows of her mind. For the first time in so long, she felt free, heart pounding. She rushed to Amelia's room, clinging to hope and fear all at once. To her astonishment, Amelia was sitting upright, sunlight kissing her pale skin. But her cheeks were no longer hollow, her lips no longer colorless. Her eyes sparkled like they once had before. Sickness claimed her. Their mother broke down in tears, clutching Amelia to her chest, her sobs mingling with laughter. Lila stood still, frozen in awe, a tidal wave of relief and gratitude washing over her in that moment. She knew the painting's destruction had been the price of Amelia's life being restored, and the thought was both a blessing and a quiet ache in her heart. Later that day, driven by a need to face what remained, Lila climbed the attic stairs once more. The space felt different now, brighter, cleaner. As if a heavy veil had been lifted, she swept the shattered pieces of wood and canvas into a pile. Each stroke of the broom like an act of closure, but when her gaze lifted to the far wall, her breath caught. There it was, the frame, untouched and whole, as though it had never been broken at all. The canvas inside seemed empty at first, a blank nothingness. But as she stepped closer, she saw it a faint, smoky outline slowly taking shape. Too pale to fully discern, yet undeniably, a cold chill ran through her bones. She backed away, whispering to herself that she would never let it control her again. Yet deep inside, she knew the truth. Evil rarely dies, it simply waits, patient as shadow. And her story with the painting was far from over.